At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. What's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. I'm Daniel Pierce. Now, let's begin. When Ignir and the other cadets were brought to the Galactic Military Exposition for a doctrinal exchange, they were unprepared to encounter what they considered primitives among the species giving demonstrations. The Vorsor, the Oxen, and the Gragsak were one thing. They had all taken part in historically significant conflicts, after all. But what were the humans doing here, parading their toy cannons? Ignir's four facial tentacles turned rigid in confusion as he peered across the massive exposition hall. The crimson appendages, each as thick as a finger and hanging from different points along his jawline and cheeks, curled and uncurled in a pattern unique to him. No two Yazaks shared the same tentacle configuration, making them as distinctive as any biometric marker. His eyes, large and amber like those of all his species, focused on a distant booth where bipedal figures moved from side to side in hurried steps. Are those humans? Ignir asked, his voice lacking enthusiasm. Beside him, Sanik turned to look, his single red tentacle hanging from the center of his chin like a grotesque beard, swaying with the motion. Among their people, having only one tentacle was rare, almost as rare as having more than 8. Sanik had learned to wear his uniqueness with pride, though Ignir knew it had taken years for his friend to embrace what made him different. 2 eyes, 2 ears, and that weird patch of fur on top of their heads. Those are indeed humans, Sanik replied, leaning forward and taking a step forward. His amber eyes narrowed as he studied the display. But what are those metallic contraptions they're parading around? They look like metallic tubes on wheels. Granil stepped up between them, his 6 tentacles arranged symmetrically, 3 on each side of his face, moving from side to side in amusement. Where Sanik was unique for his single tentacle and Ignir unremarkable with his 4, Granil's perfect symmetry was considered aesthetically ideal among their people. It had gone to his head, Ignir thought, making him even more prone to arrogance than the average Yazak cadet. Those things can only be toy cannons, Granil said with a dismissive wave of his hand. The gesture sent his tentacles swaying in unison, creating an almost beautiful pattern. Projectile throwing devices are by default obsolete for any spacefaring species. Considering the evidence, the Volsar abandoned kinetic weapons 300 cycles ago when they developed plasma casters. The Oxen's gravity manipulators made projectiles irrelevant before they even left their home system. And the Gragsak? He laughed, a sound like wind through hollow reeds. They transcended physical ammunition when they mastered energy-to-matter conversion. Any species still using chemical propulsion to throw metal chunks is practically still living in caves. Metal chunks? Sanik's single tentacle curled with mirth. Is that what they're showing off? Oversized slingshots? Worse, Ignir added, getting into the spirit of mockery. Slingshots at least don't require you to carry explosive powder around. What is even explosive powder? Granil's tentacles writhed in exaggerated horror. Next, you'll tell me they still use fire for propulsion. They do. Sanik had pulled up information on his neural interface. Chemical combustion drives a projectile. No wonder they needed such big tubes, Ignir said, compensating for inferior technology with size. Like a hatchling puffing up to look threatening, Granil agreed. At least hatchlings grow out of it, Sanik observed. These humans brought their toys to a military exposition, Granil said. Can you imagine the briefing? Yes, while other species demonstrate antimatter cannons and singularity weapons, we'll show them our boomsticks. Boomsticks. Ignir's tentacles danced with delight everywhere across his face. Perfect. The 3 cadets burst into laughter, their tentacles writhing in synchronized amusement. Other Yazak in the vicinity glanced their way, some joining in with knowing smirks. The humans' reputation as newcomers to the galactic stage preceded them, and their booth had already become something of a curiosity, not for what it might teach, but for the quaint primitiveness on display. Ah, excuse me. The voice cut through their laughter like a phased blade through armor. A figure had somehow approached without any of them noticing. An embarrassing lapse for military cadets, even ones still in training. The being stood directly in the center of their little group, having invaded their personal space with the confidence of someone who belonged there. It was a human, a tall, young male. Ignor's tentacles went rigid with surprise. The human stood perhaps a head taller than any of them, with the flat face and small eyes characteristic of the species. His skin was a shade of brown, common to Earth's equatorial regions, and his hair, that particular mammalian trait, was cut short in what Ignir would later learn was a military style, despite the being civilian clothes. Apologies for interrupting your fun at humanity's expense, the human said, and Ignir was struck by how well the translator conveyed not just the words, but the tone, friendly, with just a hint of amusement rather than offense. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. I'd like to offer to prove you wrong. That is, if you're willing to hear me out, of course. A human, Ignor said in a low voice, as if confirming what his eyes were seeing. The human's mouth curved in what Ignor recognized as a smile. Guilty as charged. Name's Samuel. Sam's fine. His small eyes scanned the three of them with surprising intensity. Yazak. That explains a lot. Your species hasn't had many opportunities to interact with humanity since we joined the Galactic Federation. I understand why you'd have, misconceptions. But I'm willing to undo this misunderstanding today if you'll let me. Granul's tentacles moved up and down as he tried and failed to hide his suspicion. Who are you exactly? A high-ranking officer trying to save face? A diplomat representing Earth, perhaps, Senek suggested. Sent to smooth over our honest observations. Oh, I know, Ignor said with certainty. You're one of their weapon makers, aren't you? Here to peddle your wares. The human, Sam, threw his head back and laughed. It was a strange sound, sharp barks of air that seemed almost painful, yet his whole body language suggested genuine mirth rather than distress. A weapons dealer, an officer, a diplomat. Well, Sam wiped moisture from his eyes, another bizarre human response to amusement. No. And definitely, no, I'm a civilian, through and through. Military enthusiast, you could say. I traveled all the way from Earth just to participate in this event to see what the various species had to offer. I got nothing but time today, and the species whose spacecraft I most want to see won't arrive until tomorrow. So I figured, why not spend a few hours with you three? If it means improving humanity's reputation for a little bit, it's worth it. The three Yazak exchanged glances, their tentacles moving in subtle communication that supplemented their spoken language. Should we? Senek's tentacle curved questioningly. He's a primitive. Granul's tentacles rippled dismissively. But Superior Vacus did order us to observe and learn from the other species, Ignir pointed out, his four tentacles making the pattern for boring task. All species, Senek's single tentacle emphasized. Even the primitive ones, technically. Granul admitted with obvious reluctance. So we give this human a chance, Ignir concluded. They turned back to Sam, who had waited patiently through their silent conference. We accept your offer, Ignir said formally. We will observe what you have to show us. Excellent, Sam clapped his hands together. Another odd human gesture. Follow me, gentlemen. Let's start with some context before we get to the fun stuff. Sam led them through the busy streets of the exposition with surprising ease. The crowd was incredibly diverse. Ignor saw at least 10 different species in the first 100 meters alone. Towering Greitzek lumbered past on their four legs, their transparent hides refracting the artificial sunlight into rainbow patterns. Clusters of Vorsar floated by in their mobility suits, their aquatic bodies suspended in personal water spheres. Oxen merchants displayed guns, their voices sounding like grinding stone. Yet Sam navigated through it all as if the chaotic multi-species crowd was his natural habitat. "You've been here before," Senek observed. "First time, actually," Sam replied, dodging a scurrying group of Picari. "But crowds are crowds, no matter the species. The dynamics are surprisingly universal." They stopped in front of a modest exhibition space tucked between two larger, flashier booths. An old piece of artillery sat behind a barrier, its bronze surface green with patina. Beside it stood a display showing the image of a massive machine that looked like a building-sized cabinet covered in lights and switches. Human script covered an informational sign that the translator quickly converted for the Yazak to read. "This isn't a live artillery demonstration yet," Sam explained, gesturing to the antique weapon. "I want to give you a piece of context about human warfare history first. You see that machine in the image? That's ENIC, Electrical Numerical Integrator, a computer. One of humanity's very first computers. Primitive calculating machines," Granell said dismissively. "Every species develops them." "True," Sam agreed easily. "But here's the interesting part. Do you know what humanity used our first electronic computer for? What pressing problem we needed it to solve?" The three Yazek exchanged glances. "Mathematical research?" Igner guessed. "Space navigation." "Economic modeling," Senek suggested. "Communication systems," Granell offered. Sam's smile widened. "Artillery calculations. Specifically calculating firing tables for artillery shells. See, the trajectory of a projectile is affected by dozens of variables. Air density, wind speed, and direction at different altitudes, temperature, the rotation of the planet, even the manufacture variations in the shells themselves. Before ENIAC, human computers, which is what we call the people who did calculations by hand, would take days to calculate a single firing table. ENIAC could do it in hours. Wait, Ignor's tentacles curled in confusion. "Your first computer was built for war." "Well, it was during one of our global conflicts," Sam said, seemingly unbothered by their reaction. "World War II, to be specific. Necessity is the mother of invention, as we say. We needed acute artillery, so we built a machine to provide it." "Your species used its first thinking machine to figure out how to throw metal chunks more accurately," Granell said flatly. That's actually exactly what I should have expected from humans." Sam laughed again, that sharp barking sound. "Tough crowd, I see. Well, fair enough. Let me show you something more modern. Come on." It's a bit of a walk. He led them away from the main thoroughfares toward a section of the exposition grounds that seemed less populated. The three Yazak found themselves having to increase their pace to keep up with the shorter human's surprisingly quick stride. "Where exactly are we going?" Ignor asked, his tentacles betraying mild annoyance at the extended walk. "Patience. Good things come to those who wait." "Is that a human saying?" "One of thousands. We collect sayings like some species collect colonies." They walked for several more minutes, past storage areas and maintenance sections, until the sound of activity ahead caught their attention. As they rounded a corner, a large open area came into view, sectioned off with safety barriers and warning signs in a dozen languages. Perfect timing," Sam announced, stopping at the designated viewing area. "They're about to fire. This is a demonstration of modern chemical artillery. Nothing fancy by human standards, just standard 155mm howitzers." The three aliens exchanged a long look, then turned their attention to the demonstration area. Behind the safety zone, they could see intense activity. Rows of human soldiers moved around several of the wheeled tubes they'd mocked earlier. Officers called out commands that the universal translator converted into barked orders about elevation, bearing, and firing solutions. "When will the demonstration happen?" Ignor asked, his tentacles showing impatience. Sam held up a hand and pressed a finger to his lips, a gesture that apparently meant, "Be quiet," among humans. "Just watch." The activity reached a crescendo. Igner saw the human soldiers step back from their weapons, one standing ready at each piece with a cord in hand. An officer raised his hand, held it for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, then brought it down sharply. The world exploded. The sound hit Igner at once. His audio membranes, evolved for the subtle harmonics of Yazek communication, screamed in protest at the thunderous roar of multiple artillery pieces firing in sequence. Beside him, Senek actually stepped backward, his single tentacle rigid with shock. Even Granil, for all his earlier mockery, stood frozen as the ground itself seemed to shake. On the massive screens above the demonstration area, images flickered to life showing a distant target range. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, in perfect synchronization, explosions bloomed across the target area. Buildings, abandoned structures set up specifically for this demonstration, disappeared in clouds of debris. Vehicle analogs were tossed like toys. The ground itself was reformed, neat craters appearing where solid earth had been moments before. The accuracy was surgical. Each shell found its mark despite having traveled several kilometers through open air. Sam finally looked at them, his expression natural but his eyes twinkling with what Igner was beginning to recognize as human amusement. Impressed yet? Or do you need to see more? Granil was the first to recover his composure, though his tentacles still showed signs of stress. The accuracy is not insignificant. If those were stationary targets in controlled conditions, any targeting system would fail under intensive winds or adverse weather. And the principle remains primitive, Senek added, though with less conviction than before. Missiles can accomplish the same thing and more. They're still primitive technology, just slightly less so. The chemical propulsion especially, Igner felt compelled to add. The energy waste alone makes it inefficient compared to modern weapons. Sam sighed, but he seemed more amused than frustrated. All right, let me explain some things about artillery you may not have considered. First, those shells, they cost a fraction of what a guided missile costs. We can fire thousands of them for the price of a single advanced missile. Second, detection. Missiles have heat signatures from their engines, electronic emissions from their guidance systems. Artillery shells, they're just metal flying through the air. Much harder to detect and almost impossible to intercept with standard countermeasures. He warmed to his topic, gesturing animatedly. Third, simplicity. No complex electronics to jam, no guidance systems to hack, no propulsion systems to malfunction. Just physics. Pure, reliable physics. Fourth, rate of fire. A good crew can put out several rounds per minute, sustained. Try that with a missile battery. And in the modern era, his smile turned predatory. We have smart shells now. AI-assisted guidance in a package the size of your fist, attached to a standard shell. All the advantages of artillery with the precision of a smart weapon. The three Yazek exchanged another look, this one longer and more complex, their tentacles moving in subtle patterns of communication. You win, Igner said finally. We understand there are very specific scenarios where artillery could still be useful. You were right, Senek added grudgingly. We should apologize for calling it primitive. But, Granil said firmly, we're still not impressed. Surely there must be things much more interesting to see than tubes that throw metal chunks, however accurately. Sam's smile widened into something that made Igner's tentacles twitch with unease. Not lost causes after all. But you still don't get the full picture. Tell you what, follow me to one more location. Since you want to be impressed, I'll show you something truly impressive. Deal? The trio exchanged a brief look. Igner could read the reluctance in his companion's tentacles, but also curiosity. They'd come this far. Agreed, Igner said for all of them. Sam led them through the crowd again, this time with apparent purpose. They passed the main exhibition halls, skirted the food court where dozens of species cuisines competed for attention, and finally arrived at a section Igner hadn't noticed before, It was quieter here, with rows of reclining chairs arranged in small clusters. Various individuals of many species sat motionless in these chairs, their eyes closed or staring blankly, a telltale sign of neural interface engagement. Virtual reality demonstration, Senek guessed, his single tentacle curling to show his obvious interest. Full sensory immersion chambers, Granell suggested, his eyes narrowing as he studied the setup. Neurosimulation pods, Igner proposed, noting the small interface nodes attached to each chair. Sam's expression showed that characteristic human amusement again. All three and none of the above. This will allow you to see a human military operation firsthand, as if you were physically present there. It's a live feed, translated through your standard neural implants into a full sensory experience. Live? Ignor's tentacles betrayed his doubt. You mean pre-recorded, surely? Live, Sam insisted. Real time, happening right now, in fact. Come on, take a seat and see for yourself. His smile turned playful. After all, there's no danger in augmented space, right? The three Yazak looked at each other one more time. Ignor could read the reluctance in his companion's body language, but they'd followed the human this far. With varying degrees of hesitation, they each selected a chair and settled into it. Just activate your standard translation implant, Sam instructed, taking a seat himself. The human military has set up a compatible feed. He'll pick up automatically. Ignor triggered his implant, the familiar tingle of neurointerface activation spreading across his consciousness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, reality shifted. He stood on the bridge of a spacecraft. But no, he wasn't standing. He was observing, present but not physical, aware but not embodied. The sensation was disorienting at first, like being a ghost in someone else's reality. Around him, or rather around his point of perception, the bridge was alive and full of hurry. Human officers moved between stations, their uniforms crisp and their movements somewhat rigid. The bridge itself was remarkably utilitarian compared to Yazik vessels, all function over form, with exposed conduits and pragmatic design choices that spoke of species that didn't bother with aesthetics. Welcome to the party. Sam's voice came from beside him. Ignor turned, or had the sensation of turning, to see Sam's virtual representation standing nearby, looking exactly as he did in reality. That's Admiral Thomas over there, the one watching the viewport alone. He's agreed to show some real action to the participants of the event. The Admiral stood with his hands clasped behind his back, studying something beyond the main viewport. Ignor followed his gaze and felt his tentacles, even in their virtual representation, go rigid. Below them hung a planet. It should have been beautiful. The world was terrestrial, with blue oceans and green-brown continents, white clouds swirling in complex weather patterns. But something was wrong. Even from orbit, Ignor could see the dark patches spreading across the landmasses like a disease, areas where the normal colors of life had been replaced by something else. What happened here? Ignor asked, his voice subdued. Sam's expression turned serious. Biotech experiment gone wrong. The colonists. They're called the Riani, a species that joined the Federation about 200 years ago. We're trying to create biological construction units, organisms that could build infrastructure using local materials. Smart, cheap, eco-friendly. But, Granell prompted, but the organisms evolved rapidly. They went from builders to hunters in less than 3 months. The colonists called them devourers because, well, they consume everything organic to fuel their reproduction. Riani managed to evacuate most of their population, but the creatures are still down there, millions of them, maybe billions by now. And the humans are here too, Sanek's single tentacle curled questioningly. Clean up, Sam said simply. This is the second fleet, performing an orbital bombardment. Now watch. This isn't your typical bombardment. As if on cue, Admiral Thomas spoke, his voice carrying across the bridge. Launch the observer swarm. Observer swarm launched, Admiral, an officer responded. Deployment in T-minus 30 seconds. On the tactical displays, Ignar watched as something erupted from the fleet's support vessels. At first, it looked like a cloud of gas or debris, but as the display zoomed in, he realized what he was seeing. Drones, millions upon millions of drones, each no larger than an insect, dispersing into the planet's atmosphere like a cloud of metallic snow. Those are spotters, Sam explained. Each one is equipped with basic sensors and a simple AI. They spread across the entire combat zone. In this case, about 3 million square kilometers. When they detect a devourer, they transmit its exact location to the fleet. 3 million square kilometers. Granule's tentacles writhed in disbelief. How many drones are there? About 800 million in the swarm, Sam said casually. They're cheap to produce. We can manufacture them by the billions if needed. On the tactical display, the planet's surface began to light up with contact markers. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of red dots indicating where the drones had found targets. Admiral, an officer called out, we have positive identification on 41,000 targets and climbing. Hold for saturation, Thomas replied calmly. I want at least 60% coverage before we begin. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Ignar found himself mesmerized by the display as more and more targets appeared. The devourers were everywhere, hiding in ruins of cities, lurking in forests, clustered in massive hives they had constructed from the bones of the planet's ecosystem. 73% coverage achieved, Admiral. 600,000 confirmed targets. All batteries, Thomas said, his voice carrying the weight of command. Prepare for time-on-target bombardment. I want synchronized impact across all designated zones. Time on target? Ignar asked. Sam's grin was almost feral. Watch and learn. Everything humanity learned about artillery during many centuries of warfare has been utilized here. Time on target means we calculate the firing solution so that shells fired at different times, from different positions, all arrive at exactly the same moment. The fleet's warships began to move, adjusting their positions with tiny bursts from maneuvering thrusters. Along their hulls, previously hidden ports opened to reveal row upon row of what Ignar now recognized as artillery pieces, massive versions of what they had seen at the demonstration. Magnetic acceleration cannons, Sam explained, apparently reading Ignar's expression. Railguns, coil guns, mass drivers, different names for the same principle. Use electromagnetic fields to accelerate a projectile to incredible speeds. No chemical propulsion needed in space. Solutions calculated, an officer announced. All batteries report ready. Fire. The word was spoken calmly, almost casually, but its effect was anything but casual. The fleet erupted in violence. Hundreds of guns fired in sequence, each one calculated to ensure its projectile would arrive at the precise moment needed. The shells, Ignar could see them on the tactical display as blue streaks, raced toward the planet at small fractions of light speed. As they entered the atmosphere, they began to glow, leaving trails of superheated plasma in their wake. 30 seconds to impact, an officer announced. Each shell, Sam said quietly, contains a small chip and minimal guidance fins, just enough to correct for atmospheric variations and ensure it hits within a meter of its designated target. The kinetic energy alone would be enough to destroy the target, but we've added a little something extra. 5 seconds to impact. The main view screen switched to a feed from the planet's surface provided by the drone swarm. It showed a ruined city, its streets crawling with devourers, grotesque things that looked like a mad fusion of insect and mollusk, all teeth and claws and hunger. Impact! The world transformed into light and thunder. Every single shell hit at exactly the same moment. The simultaneous impacts created a shockwave that was visible from orbit, a rippling distortion that spread across continents. Where each shell struck, it didn't just explode. It seemed to unmake everything within a 50-meter radius, releasing energy in a display that made nuclear weapons look subtle. The Devourers simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not scattered, erased. My gods, Senec breathed. First wave impact successful, an officer reported. 97% of targeted organisms eliminated. Drone swarm is identifying survivors and secondary targets. Prepare second wave, Admiral Thomas ordered. Standard interval bombardment this time. Let's clean up the stragglers. For the next hour, Ignar watched in stunned silence as the human fleet methodically eliminated every single devourer on the planet. The drone swarm would identify targets, the fleet would calculate firing solutions, and shells would rain from the sky with rather impressive precision. No massive explosions, no continent-crushing bombardments, just accurate destruction delivered in such absurd quantities that it was somehow more terrifying than any singular energetic event. The natives, Grano finally managed to ask. The survivors, safe in sheltered zones, Sam assured him. The drones identify them too. They create exclusion zones around any Riani life signs. We've had 0 civilian casualties so far. But the cost, Ignar said. Millions of drones, thousands of shells. Sam laughed. That's the beauty of it. Those drones, each one costs less than a meal at a decent restaurant. The shells, mass-produced in automated factories. They're mostly just refined metal with a tiny chip. The entire operation costs less than a single antimatter bomb. We could do this 10 times over for the price of one of those fancy Vorsar plasma casters you admired earlier. The demonstration continued, and with each passing minute, Ignar felt his understanding of human warfare evolving. This wasn't about primitive technology or crude weapons. This was about taking a simple concept, throwing projectiles, and refining it through centuries of practice into an art form. Every aspect had been optimized, from the mathematics of trajectory to the logistics of production, from the precision of targeting to the psychology of overwhelming firepower. Admiral, an officer announced, all primary targets eliminated. The drone swarm is conducting final sweep operations. Excellent. Begin retrieval of the swarm. Signal the colony ships that the planet will be safe for rehabilitation within 6 hours. 6 hours? Ignar couldn't hide his amazement. You cleared an entire planet of hostile organisms in less than 2 hours, and then it will be safe to inhabit in 6? Sam nodded. No radiation from nuclear weapons, no lingering plasma fields from energy weapons, no gravitational anomalies from exotic matter weapons. Just kinetic impacts and conventional explosives. The craters will actually make good foundation points for new construction. The Riani already planning to turn some of them into lakes. The virtual environment began to fade as the demonstration concluded. Ignar found himself back in the chair, his physical senses reasserting themselves. His tentacles ached from being held rigid for so long, and he realized he had been completely absorbed in what he had witnessed. Beside him, Granule and Senec were similarly affected, their tentacles moving in patterns of deep disturbance and reluctant awe. So, Sam said, standing and stretching in a distinctly human way. Still think our toy cannons are a joke? The three Yazek exchanged looks. It was Granule who spoke first, his 6 tentacles arranging themselves in a pattern of formal respect. We were wrong, he said simply. What you've shown us, it's not primitive, it's refined. Refined to a degree we didn't think possible. We wouldn't want to face humans in battle, Senec added, his single tentacle curling in a gesture of submission. Ever. Sam laughed, but he wasn't mocking. The nickname Murder Monkeys from Earth exists for a reason, you know. We've been finding ways to throw rocks at each other since before we could speak. Give us a few million years of evolution and a couple of centuries of industrial development, and well, he gestured at the now quiet demonstration area. We get pretty good at it. Ignar found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about humans. They weren't primitives playing with outdated toys. They were specialists, masters of a form of warfare that other species had abandoned. refining it to levels that made it competitive with, or perhaps superior to, more advanced technologies. "Thank you," Igner said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice, "for taking the time to educate us. We were arrogant." "Ah, most species are when they first meet us," Sam said with a shrug. "Can't blame you, really. We're new to the galactic scene, we look harmless, and we use technology everyone else gave up on. But that's the thing about humans. We're stubborn. If something works, we don't abandon it just because something newer comes along. We make it better." As they walked back toward the main exposition, Igner found himself looking at the human booth with new eyes. Those weren't toy cannons on display. They were the visible edge of a military doctrine refined through millennia of conflict, a warning disguised as a museum piece. "Hey," Sam said as they prepared to part ways. "Want some advice? If you three continue in military, remember this. Never underestimate a species based on their technology level. What matters isn't how advanced their weapons are, it's how well they use them. Humans might throw rocks, but we've gotten very, very good at calculating exactly where those rocks need to land." As Igner watched the human disappear into the crowd, he felt his entire worldview shifting. The galaxy, he realized, was far more complex and dangerous than he had imagined, and humanity, those bipedal newcomers with the chemical propulsion and kinetic weapons, might just be the most dangerous species in it. Not because they had the best technology, but because they had mastered their chosen tools to a degree that defied comprehension. The three cadets made their way back to their quarters in contemplative silence, each processing what they had witnessed. Tomorrow they would have to report to Superior Vacus about what they had learned. Igner suspected the report would cause quite a stir. Primitive weapons, he thought, his tentacles curling in dark amusement. The only primitive thing here had been their own assumptions. Today, the galaxy had just become a much more interesting and frightening place.